Berlin Cafe Einstein. All in one, this is a Meritzmgen. Alexander Weber, 34 years old, remained a 3-year-old woman with a 3.8 billion euro investment. This was something related to everything Katerina had tested. As always, a beautiful photograph, a journey and work of art that was anything but good for Alexander Welt. Because sometimes the truth we seek is the one that destroys us. And Alexander will soon discover that love, when it is false, can be more cruel than any enemy. The Cafe Einstein. To get the perfect experience from Linden, everything is better. This filter, elegantly filtered from Berliner Morgenlicht, combined frisch geröstetem Kaffee with Murmeln von Geschäfts and romantic conversations, Vermisch. Alexander Weber was the third person to get the best reservation at table number 12. He was one of Germany's wealthiest men, heir to an industrial empire that had grown into an international luxury conglomerate. His fortune of 3.8 billion euros made him a sought-after bachelor, but for 3 years his heart had only beaten for one woman, Katharina Muller. Katharina arrived with her usual natural elegance. Chestnut brown wavy hair, green eyes that always seemed to hide a secret, the smile that had captivated Alexander at their first meeting. She wore a beige coat, a designer handbag that Alexander had given her, shoes that cost more than many people's monthly salary. For weeks, a doubt had tormented Alexander. Did Katerina really love him, or did she love his wealth? His friends had warned him, his financial advisors had conducted discreet checks, but Alexander had always defended the purity of her love until he decided to put everything to the test. Alexander began his carefully crafted lie. He had lost everything. The company had gone bankrupt. Debts and bad investments had completely ruined him. He had nothing left, had to start over, maybe move and find a normal job. The ensuing silence was so thick that Alexander could hear his own heartbeat. Katerina stared at him. Her face shifted from surprise to confusion, then to something Alexander couldn't yet decipher. Alexander studied every micro-expression on Katerina's face. He searched for despair for him, concern for their shared future, encouraging words. He searched for the love that conquers all. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Katerina lowered her gaze and nervously played with the $100,000 ring he had given her. She said she needed time to think, to understand what it all meant to her. Alexander felt the first blow to his heart. Not, we'll make it work together, not, I love you anyway, but I need to think. But the worst was yet to come. Alexander pulled out a photo. It was of him smiling in a park with a 5-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. The girl was named Emma. She was his cousin's daughter. But Katerina didn't know that. Alexander lied mercilessly. He had always known he had a daughter. Her mother had died in an accident last year. Now Emma lived with him and was all he had left. Katerina stared at the photo like a poisonous snake. Her green eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, and Alexander saw something he had never seen before on the face of the woman he loved. Pure disgust. Alexander had thought through every detail of this lie. Emma really was the daughter of his cousin Sarah and had indeed lost her mother, but she lived happily with her father in Munich. Alexander had used a photo of them together, taken during the last family Christmas. When Alexander asked if she would like to meet Emma, perhaps over the weekend, Katerina decisively placed the photo on the table. She said it was all too much at once. First he ruined her, then a daughter. She couldn't handle all that. Alexander's heart truly began to break. Not because of the fiction he had created, but because of the reality that was unfolding. The woman he had dreamed of marrying and starting a family with collapsed at the first invented obstacle. Katerina admitted that she had had expectations for their relationship. Expectations she now didn't know if they could be fulfilled. She spoke of future plans she had imagined, marriage, travel, beautiful houses, freedom. And instead he had a daughter and now not even money to provide for her. The truth, raw and merciless, exploded between them like a bomb. Katerina didn't talk about love. She talked about a business plan for her own life. And Alexander had been the perfect customer until 5 minutes ago. When Alexander asked directly if she only loved him for his money, Katerina defended herself and said, "It's not that simple. Money isn't everything, but you have to be realistic. Love alone isn't enough to live on, and a child." She wasn't ready to be a mother, didn't even know if she ever would be. Alexander looked at this woman he had considered the love of his life and saw a stranger. How had he not seen who she really was? How had he fallen in love with an illusion? When he asked what would happen if he could recover, rebuild everything, Katerina looked at him with something resembling pity. She told him he was 40 years old, had a child to raise, no money, no prospects. She was still young. She couldn't throw her life away for him. She didn't finish the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. The message was clear. Alexander had become a burden, an obstacle to her dreams of wealth and freedom. In that moment, Alexander Weber, the man who owned one of Germany's largest fortunes, felt truly poor for the first time in his life. Alexander remained seated at the coffee table as if struck by lightning. Katerina's words continued to echo in his head like painful echoes of a truth he didn't want to accept. Around him, the world kept moving. The clinking of cups, the laughter of other guests, the traffic noise under the lime trees. But for him, everything was still, frozen in this moment of devastating revelation. His breath had become short, as if the very air of the cafe had become thick and unbreathable. He felt the pulse in his temples, a dull hammering that accompanied the collapse of everything he had believed in for 3 years. His hands trembled slightly as he still held the photo of Emma, this innocent child who had unwittingly acted as a catalyst to reveal Katerina's true nature. Katerina continued in a forced, sweet voice, but Alexander now heard every false note in this melody that had once enchanted him. She said she had to think about her position. She had always dreamed of a certain life, a family born of true love, not the complications of the past. Every word was like a nail driven into Alexander's heart. Complications of the past. That was how she had defined a 5-year-old child. Alexander looked again at the photo of Emma, this sweet, innocent child with blonde hair and blue eyes, smiling carefree in a park. It became clear to him that Katerina had failed on every possible level. Not only had she shown him no love in difficult times, but she had also shown inhuman coldness towards a child she considered her daughter. Katerina's voice continued, but now Alexander heard it as if it came from far away. She spoke of deserving something else, of not being able to give up her dreams. Alexander realized she was describing their relationship as a failed investment, not as a love story that had ended. When Alexander insisted on asking what would be best for both of them, Katerina avoided his gaze for the first time in the conversation. Her green eyes, which he had always thought of as deep and mysterious, now seemed cold as ice to him. She looked out the window at the luxury shops on Kurfürstendamm, and Alexander understood that her gaze was already seeking a future without him. Katerina said he should focus on his daughter, rebuild his life, find a woman who better suited his new situation. And she had to think about her own future, earn someone who could give her stability, security. He couldn't help but notice how the words stability and security sounded like synonyms for money in her mouth. A woman who better suited his new situation. A poor woman for a poor man. The classism in Katerina's words was so obvious that Alexander wondered how he hadn't noticed it before. Perhaps because it's easy not to see the mechanisms of interest around you when you're on the other side of the fence, when you're the one with the money. It's convenient to believe that the world loves you for who you are, not for what you have. Alexander felt a twinge in his stomach as he realized how many other people in his life might be there for the same reasons. How many of his friends, his employees, the people who visited his villa in Grunwald were genuine. The doubt spread like an oil stain, contaminating every memory, every relationship. When Alexander asked her directly if this child in the photo could never have been part of a decent family, Katerina's silence spoke louder than any answer. She bit her lower lip. A gesture Alexander had always found seductive now seemed to him like the nervous tick of someone calculating the best answer. Alexander understood that Emma represented everything Katerina didn't want. Responsibility, sacrifice, renunciation, a complication for the perfect life she had planned. It wasn't just a question of not being ready to become a mother. It was a question of not even wanting to consider loving someone who came with extra baggage. The coffee around her continued its normal life. A businessman at the next table talked on the phone about a corporate merger. A tourist couple leafed through a Berlin guidebook. An older woman read the Frankfurter Allgemeine. Everyone lived their normal lives while his fell apart piece by piece. Katerina stood up from the table with studied movements and took the hair mastasha, which he had given her for their second anniversary. Every gesture was elegant, controlled, perfect, as always. But now Alexander saw the performance behind every movement. She said it was better to take a break. She needed time to think. He had to get his situation in order. His situation, not his daughter, not his family, not his life. His situation, as if it were a logistical problem to solve, a setback in the planning of her own existence. Before she left, Katerina turned around one last time. The Louboutin heels, also a gift from Alexander, clacked on the cafe's marble floor like a countdown. She said she had truly loved him, but love wasn't always enough. She had to be realistic. Alexander watched her walk between the coffee tables, past the glittering shop windows under the lime trees, disappearing into the crowd of elegant Berliners and tourists dazzled by luxury. For a moment, he had the impulse to run after her, to shout that everything was wrong, that he still had all his millions, that they could return to their perfect life. But he didn't, because he understood that this perfect life had only been perfect on the surface. Beneath it lay teaching, falsehood, interest disguised as passion. Alexander remained sitting alone with Emma's photo in his hands. The waiter approached discreetly and asked if he wanted anything else. Alexander shook his head and left a $50 tip for 2 coffees. The waiter thanked him, surprised, and Alexander realized that this was the first genuine reaction he had seen that day. Do you like this story? Give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. He called his driver but then changed his mind. He had to go, breathe, feel the weight of his steps on the marble floor under the lime trees. While he waited, he looked again at Emma's photo. This innocent child had unwittingly been the instrument that revealed the truth to him. A truth that hurt, that broke his heart, but that was necessary. For 3 years, he had loved a ghost, a projection of what he wanted to see. The real Katerina was someone who would abandon a man in his hour of need, who saw children as obstacles to her projects, who measured love by the numbers in her bank account. When he finally left the cafe, Alexander noticed that Berlin seemed different to him. The luxury shop windows, the elegant buildings, the expensive cars parked in the avenues, everything now appeared to him like a theater stage. Beautiful but empty, glittering but cold. The test was over and he had failed, not because he hadn't passed the exam, but because he had chosen the wrong person to subject it to. He had spent 3 years building a sandcastle and believed it was made of stone. As he walked home, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. True loneliness, but also a strange form of freedom. He was alone, yes, but he was also free. Free from the lies, from the illusions, from the daily performances of a love that had never existed. The pain was real, heartbreaking, but so was the truth. And perhaps, Alexander thought, as he gazed at the gray Berlin sky, truth was the only solid foundation on which to build something authentic. Alexander spent the following days in a state of emotional numbness. Back in his penthouse overlooking the Brandenburg Gate, he realized how empty and cold this luxury was without someone to truly share it with. Every expensive object seemed to accuse him. He had built a golden cage to attract love, but had only attracted interest. On Friday evening, he received a message from Katerina. She had thought a lot and wanted to see him. She had something important to say. Alexander stared at the message for a long time. Part of him hoped she had changed her mind, but another part, the wounded but wiser part, knew that Katerina probably had other intentions. They met again at Cafe Einstein. Katerina arrived more beautiful than ever in a new dress, perfectly coiffed, flawless makeup, the smile that once melted him, but now seemed calculated. Katerina said she understood she had been too harsh. True love meant standing together in difficult times, overcoming challenges together. She thought they might find a solution, even for the child. Alexander felt his heart quicken, but something in Katerina's tone didn't convince him. When he asked what kind of solution, she leaned toward him and took his hands. She said he was intelligent and capable, would surely find a way to recover, and she wanted to be by his side. Regarding Emma, Katerina smiled with cold eyes. She had thought that perhaps the best thing for the child would be a more suitable environment, a good boarding school where she could receive the best education. That way, they could focus on rebuilding without distractions. Alexander felt his stomach clench. Katerina wanted to send his daughter to boarding school to remove the obstacle. She hadn't come back out of love, but because she had calculated that it would benefit her to stay with a rich man who was temporarily in trouble. Alexander decided to reveal the truth. He pulled out his wallet and placed his black credit card on the table, reserved for fortunes over 100 million. Then he showed the bank account with an 8-digit number. He explained that he had never lost anything. The company was doing better than ever. Emma's story was false. She was his niece. It had all been a test to see who she really was. Katerina's face changed from confusion to shock, then to anger. She asked how he could lie to her like that. Alexander replied, he wanted to see if she loved him for who he was or for what he had. Katerina exploded and called him crazy. Alexander replied that maybe he was crazy, but at least he now knew the truth. Katerina left and slammed the door, but not without saying that she hoped he was happy with his paranoia and mind games. She deserved better. Alexander answered her that yes, she deserved someone as rich as he was, but dumb enough not to realize what she really was. He remained seated and looked at the credit card on the table. He had spent 3 years in his heart to discover a truth that his friends had understood in 3 days. But perhaps it had been the most valuable lesson of his life. In the following months, Alexander went through what he would later describe as the most difficult, but also the most revealing time of his life. He decided to take a break from Berlin's social scene, from those glamorous events where he always saw the same faces smiling at his money. One day, while walking through Prenzlauer Berg, he entered a small independent bookstore. He had never been there before. He usually ordered books online, but that afternoon he just wanted to go out and breathe. Behind the counter stood a woman around 30, with curly hair and a messy bun, reading glasses perched on her head, a genuine smile that wasn't trying to sell anything. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that read, "Books are therapy." Her name was Elena. She had discovered Alexander and had given up a job at a large publishing house to open this bookstore. She wanted a place where books were still magic, not just products. Alexander began visiting the bookstore regularly. He never mentioned his last name, never talked about his work. To Elena, he was simply Alexander, a customer who loved to read and who gradually became a friend. Elena didn't know who he was, never Googled his name, never asked about his financial means. If Alexander came by taxi instead of with the driver, she didn't notice. If he wore jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes, she seemed to appreciate him even more. One afternoon, while they were drinking tea and discussing a novel, Elena asked him if he was always so sad. He had the look of someone who had lost something important. Alexander answered honestly that he had lost something important, or rather discovered that he had never possessed it. Elena nodded without asking any further questions, without morbid curiosity. She said that losses were sometimes disguised gains, freeing one from things one thought one wanted, but which actually harmed one. That evening, Alexander returned home and smiled for the first time in months. Elena knew nothing of his history with Katerina, didn't know about the test he had taken, had no idea about his fortune. Yet she had hit the mark. Perhaps Katerina really had been a disguised gain. Perhaps all the pain had served to lead him to this bookstore, to meet someone who saw him for who he was, not for what he possessed. For the first time in months, Alexander began to think that true love might really exist, only that it was found in places where one never looked for it. 2 years after the test that had destroyed his relationship with Katerina, Alexander sat again at table number 12 in Cafe Einstein. But this time he wasn't alone. And above all, he wasn't there to test anyone. Elena sat across from him, her curly hair catching the morning light, her eyes shining as she told him about the latest book presentation in her bookstore. She wore a simple dress she had bought with her own money, honestly earned by selling stories and dreams. Alexander watched her speak and felt a peace he had never experienced with Katerina. With Elena, he didn't have to pretend to be someone else, didn't have to hide or reveal anything. He was simply Alexander. And that was enough. Alexander decided the time had come to tell her everything. He told her he wasn't who she thought he was, that his last name was Weber, Alexander Weber. Elena was silent for a moment, then asked if she should recognize that name. Alexander explained that he was quite wealthy, very wealthy, billions to be exact. Elena looked at him for a long time, then burst out laughing. He, the guy who took the subway to the bookstore and moved while reading Goethe, was a multi-billionaire. When Elena asked why he was telling her this now, he pulled out a small blue velvet box and placed it on the table. He wanted to ask her to marry him and thought she should know what she was getting into. Alexander told her he loved her for how she read poetry aloud, how she rejoiced when someone bought a book she liked, how she looked at him when he talked about his days. He loved her because in 2 years she had never asked him what he did for a living, because it was enough for her that he was happy. Elena looked at the box, then lifted her eyes to him and asked what would happen if she said no, if she refused to marry a multimillionaire. Alexander replied that he would love her even more and ask her if she simply wanted to marry Alexander, the one who moved at Gote. Elena opened the box. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant without being vulgar, perfect for her. She said it was beautiful, but she had one condition, a prenuptial agreement. She didn't want a single euro of his money. Her bookstore, her independence, her life should remain hers. She would marry Alexander the reader, not Alexander the multimillionaire. Alexander looked at her and understood that he had found what he had been searching for his whole life without knowing it. Not a woman who wanted to share his wealth, but a woman who wanted to preserve her own poverty to be with him. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, he thought of Katerina. He wondered if she had ever found her perfect rich man, if she was happy in her life full of calculations and expediency. Then he stopped thinking about it because Elena was already asking about Emma and the story that had led her here. Some tests destroy everything. Others, like Alexander's, destroy everything false to make room for the real. And sometimes destruction is the most beautiful gift life can give you. Did this story move you? Did it make you think about what love really is and how much appearances can deceive? If you also believe that true love doesn't look at the bank account, that the right people love you for who you are and not for what you have, and that sometimes it's necessary to lose everything to understand what's truly worth keeping. Give it a like and share this video. Tell us in the comments, have you ever suspected that someone only loved you out of interest? Do you think Alexander did the right thing by testing Katharina? Do you think true love still exists in a world where everything seems to be measured in money? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the deeper sides of love, the difference between appearance and reality, and the courage to be authentic in a world full of masks. Like, comment, share, because every story reminds us that the greatest wealth is to be loved for who we are, that the truth always hurts but sets us free, and that sometimes pretending to be poor can reveal who we truly are. Whoever is truly rich at heart